This episode may contain content of a graphic nature, including descriptions of physical and sexual violence against adults, children, and animals. Listener discretion is advised.
Hi everyone, I'm Tanya.
And I'm Talia.
And we are Crimes and Consequences, a true crime podcast. Hi Talia.
Hi Tanya.
How are you doing today?
Today's a great day. How are you?
I'm doing well.
Great.
Is everyone ready for our latest episode?
If everyone means me.
Well, I guess it does just mean you.
Yes, then we're all ready here.
Before I start, I would just like to remind everyone to hit the follow/subscribe button on whatever app you're listening to.
It really does help us.
So please do that. And are we ready to go?
Again, we are ready to go. Me, myself, and I.
In 1985, Catherine, who everyone called Katie, Eastburn, lived in Fayetteville, North Carolina. Katie was a military wife. Her husband, Captain Gary Eastburn, was in the U.S. Air Force. And they had decided to move to Fayetteville in 1983 when Gary was assigned to Pope Air Force Base, where he served as the chief of air traffic control. Katie and Gary met in the early 70s and married in 1975. In the 10 years they'd been married, they welcomed 3 little girls into their family, and at the time of our story, Kara was 5, Erin was 3, and the youngest was Jana at 22 months.
Oh, they had their hands full.
Oh, for sure. So yes, Katie had her hands full while Gary worked to further his military career. In May of 1985, Gary and Katie had been discussing moving overseas to England, where Gary was interested in a liaison job with the Royal Air Force.
I didn't even know you could do that.
I didn't either. At first, Katie didn't want to move out of the country and leave her family, who were located in Kansas. However, Gary, knowing Katie loved horses, enticed Katie to move by telling her that where they were moving to, there were lots of horses to ride, and that she could teach the girls to ride too.
There's a lot of horses in the United States.
I know. Maybe not in Fayetteville. I don't know. Maybe there is. There has to be.
Anyway.
But this got Katie excited about moving. Katie was busy preparing for the move while Gary was away at Squadron Officer School at a base in Montgomery, Alabama.
So she had to watch the kids by herself.
Yes, she was home alone while Gary was away in Alabama.
Shit.
I know. On or about May 7th, Katie had placed an ad in the Beeline Grab Bag, which was a newspaper that was aimed at the large military population in Fayetteville, which not only included Pope Air Force Base, but also included the U.S. Army Base Fort Bragg. The ad she had placed was to rehome the Eastburn's family dog, Dixie, who was an English setter. The ad in the Beeline Grab Bag caught the eye of 27-year-old Timothy Hennis.
Why didn't they want little Dixie?
Well, they were afraid that Dixie would not do well with the quarantine that she was going to have to go through when they moved overseas. Tim was also in the military, serving at Fort Bragg as a sergeant at the time. Tim was married to his wife, Angela, and when he saw the ad in the newspaper, he and Angela discussed Tim checking out Dixie to see if she'd be a good fit in their family. After having this discussion with Angela, Tim drove over to see Dixie and arrived at the Eastburns' home around 9 p.m. on May 7th. He parked his white Chevrolet Chevette in front of the Eastburn home and walked to the front door. Tim knocked on the door and Katie answered. He had called earlier to let her know he wanted to visit with Dixie, so she was expecting him. Katie invited him inside the home. Tim stepped inside and met Dixie. Katie explained to him that her husband was in the Air Force and they were going to be moving overseas soon. Katie told him that they just wanted to find Dixie a good home, and she did include a nominal fee on the ad, and it was about $10. And she did that to keep the cranks away, is what she told Tim, which I took to mean that somebody who really wants to adopt a dog will pay the $10 as opposed to someone who maybe has nefarious means to get the dog. I don't know. Tim really liked Dixie and wanted to take her home to see if she got along with the dog that he and Angela had already had, which was a Spitz breed. Katie was agreeable to allowing Tim to take Dixie with him, and she watched as Tim left her home and led Dixie to the car.
So is it just a temporary basis to see if it works out and he could return her if it didn't?
Yes. While Gary was away for training in Montgomery, he would call to talk to Katie every Saturday morning from the phone that was outside his room. As usual, Gary made the call on Saturday, May 11th, and when he called the house, it just rang and rang with no answer. Katie didn't pick up. Gary wasn't alarmed, though, because he thought, well, she must have just gotten busy, maybe with one of the kids, or there's some reasonable explanation, even though she knew he called every Saturday morning. He called again the following day, Sunday, May 12th, which also happened to be Mother's Day. When Katie also didn't answer the call on Sunday, Gary became worried. That same day, Mother's Day, one of Katie's neighbors, Bob Seafelt, noticed that the newspapers were piling up at the front door of the Eastburn's house. He noticed that Katie's Toyota station wagon was still in the driveway and wondered, why is she letting the newspapers pile up if she's still home? He felt this was really unusual and decided to go over to the house to see what he could find out. Bob rang the doorbell and got no answer. He rang it again and again with no luck. The last time he rang it, while he got no answer, he could hear a baby crying from inside the house. Alarmed, Bob rushed back home and told his wife to call the police. An officer responded to the call, and he and Bob went over to the Eastburns' home together. The officer tried ringing the doorbell at first, but like Bob, got no answer. He then left the front door and made his way around the house to a bedroom window. The officer cut the screen and managed to open the window. He must have jimmied it or something. He climbed his way inside the house as Bob stood outside. He had landed inside of Jana's room and found the baby crying, sweaty, and dehydrated, suffering from a severe case of diarrhea.
Was she in her crib?
She was in her crib. He picked up Jana and passed her out the window to Bob, who was still outside. Gary would later find out that Jana was only about 8 hours from death by the time she was found. So it was lucky that they got there. With Jana safely out of the home, the officer went on to search the rest of the house. The home was still, and there was no sound coming from anywhere. However, from the moment he landed in the home, the officer knew something was very wrong. The stench of death was just hanging in the air. The officer left Jana's bedroom to walk into the hall, and he saw 2 bodies laying at the end of the hall. He immediately radioed the police station and asked for someone from homicide to come. Homicide detectives Robert Biddle and Jack Watts responded to the call from the officer around 1 p.m. that Sunday. They arrived to the Eastburns' home and came in through the side door from the carport. As they walked into the house, they too knew that whatever they were going to find in the home was decaying because the smell was just unmistakable. They came into the living room and noticed a pair of women's jeans, a pair of torn women's underwear, and 2 buttons that looked like they belonged on a woman's blouse.
Where were they in the living room?
I'm not sure where in the living room, on the floor. The first body they came to was that of 5-year-old Kara. She was covered with a Star Wars blanket, and when they lifted the blanket, they noticed she was covered in blood and she had been stabbed in the chest several times. They continued their search, and as they went into the master bedroom, they next found 3-year-old Erin. She was laying on the side of the bed. She had been stabbed and also beaten in her chest and back with an unknown object. Finally, on the other side of the bed, the detectives found Katie's body. She was nude from the waist down, had ligature marks on her wrists, had been raped, and had been stabbed several times. All 3, Kara, Erin, and Katie, had had their throats slashed in addition to the other injuries they suffered.
Was that maybe just to make sure they were dead?
I think that's what it was. I think that was the final injury they were inflicted with. As Detectives Biddle and Watts looked around, they found fingerprints and hair that was collected to be analyzed later. They also used luminol on the walls and floor of the master bedroom, and they found that someone had really done a piss-poor job at trying to clean it up. Detectives Biddle and Watts discovered the identity of the victims, and they learned that Gary Eastburn was in Montgomery for training.
So he couldn't have done it. Right. They had the unpleasant task of telling Gary his entire family had been annihilated. Oh, that poor man.
I know. Can you imagine getting that phone call?
No.
Detective Watts had to make that call to the phone outside of Gary's room, the one he had been trying to use to get a hold of Katie. One of Gary's classmates answered the phone and called to Gary and said, "Hey, the phone's for you." Gary said, "Is it my wife?" "No, it's some detective."
Oh, that's never good.
No.
That's never, ever good.
No, Gary's stomach dropped, as you can imagine. He got on the phone, and the first thing out of his mouth to Detective Watts was, "Are any of them still alive?" Detective Watts would only tell him there was a death in the family and that he needed to immediately come home to Fayetteville. He refused to tell Gary any further information until he arrived and saw him face to face.
Oh, that's so cruel.
Oh, I'm sure he was freaking out. He flew home immediately with another officer that had accompanied him. Once the plane touched down, they went immediately to the police station. In questioning Gary, Detectives Biddle and Watts tried to find out if Gary knew anything. He was quickly cleared as a suspect, as you pointed out a little bit earlier, when it was confirmed that he had definitely been in Alabama during the murders. Gary tried to help the investigation and told the detectives that the only thing he could think of that had happened recently that could possibly be unusual was that Katie had placed the ad in the beeline to find Dixie a home, and that she had found a guy that came to get Dixie, but he didn't know anything else about the man who had planned to adopt her. Realizing that Gary didn't have much information for them to go on, the detectives left him to his grief and continued looking for the person who had murdered his family. They soon got a lead when a man named Patrick Cohn contacted them the day after the bodies were found to say that he may have important information for them. He told them that in the early morning hours of May 10th, he had been walking past the Eastburn home around 3 a.m.
What day is that?
The early morning hours of May 10th would have been Friday morning. So 3 a.m. Friday morning. He worked as a janitor, and he had been walking to work. That's why he was up so early. He encountered a tall white man wearing jeans, a knit hat, and a black members-only jacket. Do you remember those jackets?
I do. They were super cool then.
Yes, they were.
Not so much now.
Not so much now. The man was walking down the Eastburn's driveway carrying a black garbage bag that was slung over his shoulder. The man saw Patrick and said to him, "Leaving a little early this morning," and Patrick walked past him. When Patrick had walked a few steps, he turned around to get another look at the guy, and he saw him drive away in a white Chevette.
A white Chevette?
A white Chevette. Patrick agreed to giving a police sketch artist a description of the man he saw, and the sketch was distributed to the media. The same day that Patrick was meeting with the sketch artist, Gary went to the home with the detectives to see if he could tell them if anything was out of place. Gary noticed that an envelope of cash that was usually kept in the house was gone, as was Katie's ATM card and a piece of paper on which the ATM card's password was kept. Don't ever write that down.
She wrote that down?
I know. The detectives wondered if robbery was a motive in their case. They soon determined that the murders probably took place sometime on Thursday night between 8 p.m. and Friday morning at 3 a.m. Katie had been seen earlier that evening around 8 p.m. that Thursday night, and the newspapers that had piled up had started with Friday's publication. The police hoped that they would get a lead from the police sketch, and they also decided they wanted to question the man who came to the Eastburn home on Tuesday to adopt Dixie. The day after the police sketch was released to the public, Tim Hennis was home having lunch with his wife, Angela, when they saw a special news bulletin that announced the police wanted to talk to the man who drove a white Chevette and had adopted an Irish setter from a family who lived at the address of the Eastburn home.
And he's like, "Oh, that's me."
He's like, "Oh, that's me." So Angela and Tim and Angela's newborn daughter, Christina, they went with Tim to the police station where he was held for questioning. When Detective Watts first laid eyes on Tim, he was taken aback over how Tim looked exactly like the guy in the sketch. And he was quite tall. Tim was 6'6".
Oh, yeah, that's tall.
Mm-hmm. That is a very tall man.
You are going to stand out.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot of man.
It is a lot of man. Police first questioned Tim about his whereabouts on the Thursday prior when Katie was last seen alive. Tim told the detectives that he had driven Angela and Christina to his in-laws for a weekend visit, and then on his way home stopped to fill his gas tank. They asked him for hair, blood, and saliva samples, which he gave willingly. They also took his fingerprints and palm prints. They ended up questioning him for 7 hours.
And it sounds like he doesn't really have an alibi.
They did ask him about Katie. He admitted he visited her home on Tuesday to adopt Dixie, but that he never saw her again. He did hear from Katie on Thursday when she called to see how Dixie was doing and to see if Dixie was getting along with their family dog.
What time did she call?
I don't know. That's a good question, though.
Thank you.
I never saw what time. Tim didn't give them any other information. The detectives really didn't like him at all.
I don't either.
They found him to be really arrogant, like in his answers. But they knew if he was guilty, he wasn't going to give them anything. While Tim was still in custody, they made a photo lineup for Patrick, that eyewitness, to view. And in the photo lineup, they included a photo of Tim. Patrick took a few moments to carefully review each photo and was positive in his ID when he pointed at the photo of Tim and said that's who he saw walking down the Eastburn's driveway. Despite the positive ID, the police weren't able to get a search warrant to search Tim's home while he was in custody, and they had to release him. Later that evening, they did secure the search warrant, and they headed to Tim's. He answered the door, and when the detectives and members of the State Bureau of Investigations, SBI, were coming inside his home, he said to them, "I hope you guys know what you're doing."
Oh.
He was arrested on the spot and was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of rape.
Sounds like they bitch slapped him right back.
Oh, we know what we're doing. Tim's dad was a retired IBM executive and was wealthy enough to hire 2 very well-known criminal defense attorneys in Fayetteville. Their names were Gerald Beaver and Billy Richardson. The case that the state had against Tim mainly relied on eyewitness testimony and the fact that Tim's alibi was shaky, and it was challenged, especially when a former girlfriend of his came forward to tell police a different series of events than the one Tim provided to them about Thursday, the 9th.
And his was basically, I dropped my family off, got some gas, and went home, right?
Right. According to his ex-girlfriend, Nancy, she said Tim had stopped by her house on Thursday night, the 9th. After they had broken up, they still remained friends, so it wasn't unusual for him to come by for a visit. But the visit he made on the 9th was out of the ordinary because he just showed up unannounced. Tim knew that Nancy's husband had been deployed to Germany at the time, and she was home alone. Nancy let him inside, and the two had a talk. At some point in the conversation, she tapped Tim's wedding band and asked him, "Hey, how's your marriage going?" Tim told Nancy that Angela had left him, implying that the visit she was making to her parents was permanent. Nothing else really happened that night. They just had a talk.
Why would he say that?
I don't know. I'm thinking he's looking for a booty call.
A little boom, chicka, 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 boom, boom.
Yes. Prosecutors hung onto Nancy's story and used it as part of the foundation for their case. They believed that Tim had gone to Nancy looking for some bow, chicka, bow, bow.
Oh, that was real good.
Thank you. And she had rejected him. After leaving Nancy's, they think Tim remembered that Katie's husband was also out of town, and he thought maybe she would be interested in getting it on.
He thinks he's just going to show up at someone's door and they're going to be like, hey, man, I was just thinking about your dick.
She's got 3 little kids. When he showed up to her house, they think she too rejected him, and it was probably more than he could bear, and he snapped. Tim was known to have a violent streak. He had gotten into a fight with a coworker at a Bennigan's that he worked at. So he had picked a fight with one of his coworkers. The case against Tim was mostly circumstantial, but the prosecutor made a good story of the events. Police had found out that the Friday after Katie and her daughters were murdered, and they were murdered on Thursday. So that Friday, Tim took his black members-only jacket to the dry cleaners, and that was the only item he dropped off during that trip. Tim's neighbors also told police that on Saturday, Tim had made a bonfire in his backyard in a 50-gallon metal drum, and the fire burned for at least 5 hours. So what was up with that?
Guilty as sin.
So I'm wondering if he's burning the things that were in the black garbage bag that he was carrying out of the house when Patrick Cohn saw him.
Oh, that would make sense.
Another witness was tracked down about a month before Tim's trial began. Katie Eastburn's ATM card had been stolen, and the police found out that her card had been used on Friday night and Saturday morning prior to the bodies being found.
They didn't have cameras at the ATM at that time?
I wonder, right?
They must not have.
They must not have. Both of those transactions, $150 was withdrawn from the bank, which was the maximum daily limit. A woman who had visited the ATM machine on Saturday morning, 3 minutes after the Saturday morning withdrawal was made, remembered seeing a tall blonde man wearing camouflage pants who drove away in a small light-colored car.
Wait a second. How is she remembering this a month before the trial?
I know.
I don't remember even when I go to the ATM machine myself, let alone who's by me.
Right. I know. The timing seems kind of...
It's a little suspect.
Maybe because he was so tall. I don't know. Police learned that Tim had paid the rent on the home he and Angela rented. He paid it late on Saturday in the amount of $310, and $10 was the late fee. So he all of a sudden had $300 on Saturday. Tim had a past that involved financial problems. He was convicted in the past 3 times for writing bad checks. The circumstantial case just seemed to get better and better. Prior to going to trial, Tim was offered a plea deal, which he turned down, saying he wasn't going to admit to something he didn't do.
What was the deal?
It was him pleading guilty to 2 counts of second-degree murder, which would have probably carried with it 2 life sentences.
Might as well roll the dice.
Right. What are you going to give me? 3? No, they do have the death penalty in North Carolina. During the trial, the prosecutor showed the jury a slideshow of the crime scene, with many of the photographs being quite explicit. And from what I read, the slideshow lasted like an hour. It was quite a few photos. The prosecutor was very dramatic when, in his closing argument, he pointed at Tim and said, "There's your baby killer."
Oh, shit. He killed 2 little girls.
Right.
Allegedly.
The jury deliberated and after 10 hours had their verdict. Tim was guilty of all 3 first-degree murder charges and the rape charge and was sentenced to death. On the day he was sentenced, a letter was sent to him in prison, so it was postmarked that day. It said, quote, "Dear Mr. Hennis, I did the crime. I murdered the Eastburns. Sorry you're doing the time. I'll be safely out of North Carolina when you read this. Thanks, Mr. X." End quote. A copy of the same letter was also sent to police.
I don't even know what to say about that.
I know.
Okay.
After Tim's conviction, Gary tried to get his life back together, as you can imagine. He had turned down the liaison job in England after his family was murdered, but he was offered it again, and in 1988, he moved overseas with Jana. While Gary was trying to pick up the pieces by settling in a new life in England, Tim's legal team were busily working on his appeal. The main issue that they argued in his appeal was that the slideshow of numerous and graphic photos that the prosecutor presented during his case unduly prejudiced his defense.
That is a prevalent theme in appeals. Mm-hmm. And usually they end up losing that appeal unless it is so far over the top that the prosecutor could have made their point with a lot less photos.
And I think that was their point because Tim had already stipulated that the cause of death was stabbing. So there must have been a lot of pictures because his appeal was granted.
Yeah, wow.
So Tim was given another opportunity to try his case. And his case is often cited still in North Carolina when there's too many photos being shown. Tim's defense attorneys had been working on building his new case for the prior 3 years, so they were ready when he got his new trial. They attacked the eyewitness testimony of Patrick Cohn. In the 3 years from when Tim was convicted, Patrick had gotten into trouble with the law. He had been arrested for using a stolen ATM card, driving a car with expired registration, which, frankly, I've done.
Yeah, I'm like, what the hell is that? Jesus.
I've done that several times.
I'm probably doing it now. I don't know.
And public drunkenness.
Oh, shit. Well, me too.
2 out of 3, huh, Talia? They tried not only to discredit his character, they also tried to discredit his account of the evening. Patrick had said that the weather that evening was fair and the stars could be seen. But Tim's defense called a meteorologist who testified that on the night of May 9th, 1985, the weather was cloudy. They also called a helicopter pilot to testify who had grounded himself that night because it was a, quote, very, very dark and overcast, end quote. So basically saying he's lying.
And it would be hard to identify somebody in the dark at 3 a.m.
Right.
But I don't know how well lit the area is.
Right. That's very true. And I don't think the driveway was close to the porch lights. They also attacked the other important eyewitness, the woman at the ATM machine. They told the court that this woman told investigators she didn't remember anything. And it was only the day before the first trial when she confirmed to prosecutors that she saw the tall blonde man that Saturday morning. So like you mentioned, it seems kind of suspect. Also casting doubt on Tim's guilt, his defense got Gary to admit that 2 months prior to Tim visiting the Eastburns' home, Katie had received threatening phone calls in the middle of the night from a man who knew her name and told her he was on his way over.
Oh, what the hell is that about?
That's super creepy. Nobody ever showed up, though. Tim's defense also introduced new evidence into the record in his retrial. Footprints that were found outside the Eastburn house were 3 sizes too small to be his. A spot of blood that was found on a bathroom towel didn't match Tim's blood type. And a pubic hair that was found didn't match Tim or Katie. The defense also managed to track down a teenager who lived in the Eastburns neighborhood who was out walking the night of the murders, and he looked a lot like Tim. They could have been related. The defense explained away the bonfire in Tim's backyard by saying nothing was found in the ashes that was traced to the Eastburns home. Also, remember the members-only jacket Tim took to the dry cleaners?
Yeah.
A witness from the International Fabric Care Institute, who knew, testified that the chemicals used in dry cleaning could not remove all traces of blood. 2 days after the trial ended, the jury came back with a not guilty verdict. And after spending more than 800 days on death row, Tim was released a free man. Several of the jurors shook his hand as he raised his now 4-year-old daughter, Christina, in the air in triumph.
Wow. And you know what? That is really quick to be sentenced to death and then released. That's amazingly quick.
Right.
That's shocking. Tells you what money will get you.
Mm-hmm. After he was acquitted, there was a lot of press surrounding his acquittal.
So he's now the poster boy for wrongful convictions.
Yes.
Okay.
Tim also decided to re-enlist in the Army when he was acquitted, and he received 3 years of back pay for all the time he spent in prison.
What?
He got a promotion to staff sergeant and a good conduct medal.
Wow. Holy shit.
He served in Operation Desert Shield in Saudi Arabia, and he also spent some time in Somalia. He became a decorated soldier.
Damn, and I was ready to hang him.
I know. Shame on you, Talia.
I'm ashamed of myself.
He and Angela added a son to their family, and Tim became scoutmaster for his Boy Scout troop.
Oh, that's so cute.
He was acquitted in 1989, so I'm just giving everyone a timeline. In 1998, the Hennis family moved to Washington State, and in a major coincidence, moved to a town only about 15 miles away from Gary, Eastburn. I told you earlier that Gary had moved to England with Jana in 1988. While he was there, he met a British nurse and got remarried. However, after the second trial, they moved back to the U.S. and settled in Washington State.
15 miles away from where Tim and Angie end up?
Right.
Wow.
Coincidence. And from all accounts, they never ran into each other.
Thank God.
In 2004, Tim retired from the Army as a master sergeant after serving 23 years in the military and got a job in a waste treatment facility. Our story doesn't end there, however.
Of course not.
Of course not. But before I tell you what happens next, we're going to take a break. Through a crazy sequence of events, a homicide detective with the Cumberland County Sheriff's Department named Larry Trotter, and Cumberland County is the county in which Fayetteville, North Carolina is located. Detective Trotter discovered in 2005 that there was DNA in the Eastburn case that had never been tested. Vaginal swabs had been taken from Katie Eastburn and preserved with other evidence in the case. Detective Trotter located the specimens and sent them off to North Carolina's SBI lab for testing. The lab determined that there was enough to test for DNA, and Detective Trotter waited for the results that came a year later.
So how long is this after the murder?
19 years. Do you want to guess whose DNA was found on the samples?
Yours.
Wrong.
I threw you for a loop.
You did. It was Tim Hennis.
Son of a bitch.
Son of a bitch.
You are on fire today. I'm sorry, just the way you said that. I'm like, son of a bitch. Son of a bitch. Fuck.
Detective Trotter told the district attorney, whose name was Edward Granis, and his lead investigator, who happened to be Detective Larry Biddle, who, if you'll remember, was one of the lead detectives on the Eastburn murders all the way back in 1985. Detective Trotter told them about the positive DNA results.
You see, Tanya, they have a problem now.
They do.
Because he was already tried once and acquitted.
Correct.
Double jeopardy laws forbid
absolutely
a second trial.
And the district attorney and Detective Biddle knew this. But when Detective Biddle found out about the results, he immediately called Gary. He wanted Gary to know that they did have the right man all along, but that he wasn't sure anything else could be done about it.
And by the way, yeah, he's free.
Correct.
God damn.
So Tim is protected by the Fifth Amendment, and the state of North Carolina could do absolutely nothing to him.
He could go around and brag about the murders, and they couldn't do anything about it.
Couldn't do anything about it.
Just like our episode for Patreons only, Double Jeopardy.
That was a very good episode.
The guy got away with murder.
He really did.
And then they found photos of the murder years later.
Yes, and he was guilty.
It's sin.
It's sin. However, our story doesn't end there either, Talia.
Jesus!
Because there's a loophole in all of this. The district attorney, Edward Granis, he fought really hard on this case. He realized that maybe Tim could be tried again for the Eastburn murders. He invited 3 attorneys from Fort Bragg to his office to join a discussion with him, Detective Biddle, and Detective Trotter, and they presented the DNA evidence to the Fort Bragg attorneys. This meeting occurred because, according to the dual sovereignty doctrine in the U.S. Constitution, someone can be tried and acquitted in the state court, and then they could also be tried for the same crime in federal court. The doctrine of dual sovereignty states that state government and federal government are 2 separate sovereigns. So in this case, Talia, because he's part of the military is part of the federal government. And that's how it applies in this case.
So double jeopardy's kind of whoop, whoop, bye-bye.
Right.
Damn.
After the meeting with the county prosecutor, the military attorneys went to their commanding general at Fort Bragg. So the chain of events was the county's prosecuting attorney met with these attorneys from Fort Bragg. Those attorneys go back to Fort Bragg and they go to their general, whose name was John Vines, and they present the evidence. It really didn't take much to convince him to then call the Secretary of the Army to request that Tim be recalled to active duty so that once he was in active duty, he could be court-martialed and charged with 3 counts of murder.
Wow. So he was forced to return to active duty.
Yes, because apparently a retired soldier can be recalled to active duty, which I didn't know.
And then they had him court-martialed.
Absolutely.
That is beautiful.
They immediately arrested him. On September 26, 2006, an agent from Fort Bragg's Criminal Investigative Division, CID, a military lawyer, and 2 local policemen drove to Tim Hennis's home and handed him the orders to report to Fort Bragg within the next 30 days. Like, you're being called back. Tim was not happy. He said, "This is bullshit," and ordered everyone to leave his property immediately. He was angry.
Did he know about the DNA?
No, he did not know. So he's just thinking he's being recalled to active duty when he's been in retirement for a couple years.
That just makes it so much better.
I know.
Just waiting.
Despite being pissed about it, Tim did report to duty the following month as ordered. And as I mentioned, he was arrested for the murders. Tim's court-martial began on March 17th, 2010.
I bet he was surprised as hell.
I know, right?
He thought he got away with it for decades.
Mm-hmm. The jury consisted of uniformed men and women known as members who were of the same rank as Tim or above. So that makes up your jury. Something that is a little different during a court-martial as compared to a civilian trial, the members of the jury do not need to come to a unanimous decision to convict. They only need a 2/3 majority. However, they would need a unanimous decision on both the conviction and sentence if the sentence ultimately was death.
Oh, that's right. You can do death in federal courts.
So 21 years after he was acquitted for the Eastburn murders, Tim was tried again for the same crime.
For the 3rd time.
For the 3rd time, yes. The prosecution's case was presented much like it was in Tim's first trial, with the addition of the DNA evidence.
I can't wait to find out how he gets around this DNA.
Well, it's stupid. I'm just going to tell you right now. Gary Eastburn was there again, and he had to deal with the emotions of losing his family once again. He thought it would be easier this time, but it wasn't. All of the anger he experienced came flooding back when he looked at Tim. Jana Eastburn testified. By then, she was 26 years old, and she spoke about how she had no memory of her mother and sisters, even though when she was interviewed by a child psychologist shortly after the murders, the child psychologist was trying to help with the investigation. When the psychologist showed Jana a photo of her mom, she kissed the photo.
Oh, damn it, Tanya. I got goosebumps,
I know, this poor baby. The psychologist who did the interview believed that Jana might have heard things during the night of the murder, but she didn't think Jana witnessed anything, thankfully.
Because she was 22 months, right?
Yes. As part of her evaluation, the psychologist also showed Jana photos from the police lineup, but didn't get a reaction, and that's why she thinks Jana didn't see anything. During Tim's trial, Jana said she felt immense guilt throughout her life over the fact she didn't feel anything for her mother and sisters, even though everyone around her experienced great sadness because she just forgot.
This is making me really sad.
I know. She felt like a bad person, Talia. She also had survivor's guilt and wondered, why didn't he kill her too?
Oh, wow.
Like, why did he leave her in the crib?
I'm not used to such emotion.
I know. I'm sorry.
I'm trying to process this.
Tim's defense presented the case much as it had been presented in his second trial. However, they included the fact that the evidence custodian for Cumberland County had been convicted of stealing guns from evidence, and that the evidence collected at the crime scene could have been contaminated because no one wore gloves.
Okay, contaminated with somehow his DNA?
Have it be not his DNA, even though it was his DNA? Saying maybe it wasn't? I don't know. However, the major difference in their case in this trial and the one presented in Tim's second trial was they planted the idea that Tim and Katie had consensual sex.
Well, this is a new twist.
Right, and that's how Tim's DNA ended up inside of her.
He could have mentioned that 21 years ago.
Right? As you can imagine, this argument went over like a lead balloon because if you look at who's hearing this evidence, the jurors are military members who often were deployed, leaving spouses and significant others behind with the hopes that they'll remain faithful. Besides that, the prosecutor rebutted this by having the medical examiner testify that sperm taken from Katie was deposited there, quote, shortly, end quote, before she was killed. Because apparently, after a day or two, sperm started to disintegrate. So they start to lose their tails. So that gave the medical examiner kind of like a timestamp. Who knew? The prosecution was quick to point out that at no point in either of Tim's previous trials did he admit to having any contact with Katie after he picked up Dixie, except for the phone call she made a couple days later to check on Dixie. Tim even testified on his own behalf in his second trial and stated he had no other contact with Katie besides those two instances.
So then that would mean he perjured himself.
Correct. So is he lying?
Now or then?
Or then? When Tim's trial ended, the jury members took only 2 hours to reach their verdict. It was very fast. They unanimously decided that Tim was guilty of 3 counts of murder. A week after his sentencing, Tim was once again sentenced to death. In addition, his rank was reduced to E1, which is the lowest rank in the Army. He was ordered to forfeit all pay and allowances and was given a dishonorable discharge. In 2011, Tim's attorneys demanded that he be allowed a retrial after it was discovered a lab worker in North Carolina's SBI, her name was Brenda Bissett-Dew. She had testified at Tim's trial. She was being investigated for writing misleading lab reports in other cases. The prosecutor argued, however, that Tim's defense had presented the argument that Tim had consensual sex with Katie before her murder. So which was it? The DNA was his or it wasn't?
That's a very valid point.
Either the lab report's a lie or it's the truth. The request for retrial was denied. Of course, Tim appealed this decision, and he had a really creative argument. In his appeal in 2011, he argued that the U.S. Army had no jurisdiction to try him for the murders. The Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit, so the Federal Court of Appeals, heard this argument. The crux of it was that the military's jurisdiction had expired by the time he was court-martialed, which would have meant that the verdict was void. He had been previously honorably discharged at the time of his first trial, but following his acquittal, he re-enlisted. They said that based on this break in service, any crimes Tim may have committed in the first leg of his service couldn't be prosecuted because that portion of his service had ended. The Court of Appeals dismissed his petition.
Yeah, because he committed the crime while he was an active service member.
Correct. They said that they weren't going to hear it anymore until all of his military appeals had been exhausted. In 2013, Tim again argued this jurisdictional question, but this time in front of the Army Court of Criminal Appeals. The petition was denied in October of 2013. And in November, he asked the Army Court of Criminal Appeals for reconsideration. His petition was again denied. The following year, in February 2014, he filed another appeal with the U.S. Court of Appeals for Armed Forces.
Listen, you did the crime, you do the time.
Right.
Can we just stop this now?
And in each appeal, he's bringing up this jurisdictional question.
I mean, I do get it. There's some serious loopholes.
Right.
That they went through.
He eventually appealed all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, and that was denied on January 11th, 2021.
Denied.
One of the sources I used for this episode was a lengthy article from The New Yorker from 2011. The reporter had met with Gary Eastburn in 2011, and they discussed Tim's upcoming appeal. That was the start of his appeals process. The reporter asked him if he planned to follow the appeals. Gary said he had no interest in seeing Tim executed and preferred that he just rot away in jail for the rest of his life. He also said that if Tim is successful with his appeal, he really doesn't have it in him to attend a fourth trial.
Oh, I don't blame him.
Yeah, he said 3 was enough. Tim is rotting away in federal prison, just so everyone knows, in Leavenworth, Kansas, just as Gary wanted. Even though he's on death row, he can only be executed by an order of the president.
Well, that's not going to happen.
I know. There was a book written about Tim's case after his acquittal called Innocent Victims by Scott Wisnat, which was published in 1993. It was based on the fact that Tim was innocent and he had been wrongly convicted. So that was basically what the book was about. I didn't read it, but I thought it was funny because Detective Biddle said he didn't read it because it was fiction. So that is my wild case. They were going to get Tim no matter what.
Wow, it's really fascinating. I mean, as two attorneys, Tanya and I paused it for a little bit and started talking some legalese because from our perspective, it's really fascinating.
Yeah, we fell down the dual sovereignty rabbit hole.
Google hole.
Yeah, Google hole for a few minutes.
It's very sad, but it's nice to see that justice was done.
Yeah. So I'd like to remind everyone to hit the follow subscribe button.
Well, wait.
I know we have business.
We've got to do a Review the Reviewer.
Oh, my God. We got to do Review the Reviewer.
Backed by popular demand. It is time for Review the Reviewer.
Review the Reviewer. We need a theme song. Can we read the bad one?
Sure.
Okay.
I'm ready to be hurt. So what you got for me, Tanya?
Okay, Talia. I have a 1-star review that was left recently.
It's going to hurt me, isn't it?
The title says, Banterless, ? It says, I started listening because they advertise their straightforward storytelling. They are just as annoying with their accents and inappropriate humor while sharing the gruesome stories.
Ouch.
Just straight Ohio trash.
What? We aren't even from Ohio.
No, we are Michigan trash, everyone.
Hello, Michigan trash, yes. Well, I got to give that a 1 star.
Oh, I'm giving that a 1 star for sure.
Clearly didn't do the research. Mildly hurtful.
And what inappropriate humor.
I think Karen needs to take it down a notch. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, she gave us a 1 star. We're giving her one.
1 star.
I have one other review.
Okay.
This one was a 5-star review.
Okay, that's going to make me feel better.
This was also left recently. This was from Allie7380. She said, being from the South, their adorable Michigan accents were the first thing to catch my attention, and I'm so glad that they did. I am a true crime junkie, and after a long search for the perfect channel, I came across these lovely ladies. They have no idea who I am, but I'm pretty sure they are my long-lost Yankees sisters. Like for reals. Triplets separated at birth.
We're going to do Ancestry.com and find out.
Yeah, maybe Talia and I do have a long-lost sister.
And we're sisters.
Yes, maybe.
I don't fucking think so.
She said, I'm really not crazy, I promise.
Oh, that's good.
I trust you.
She's very sane.
She said, I just say that because it never fails that every time I let out a disgusted groan over something a nasty murderer did, the one of them not telling the story groans right along with me. They hate on the same people I do, love the same people I do, and want to throw away the key on the same people I do.
Well, I'm going to give it 5 stars.
Yes, Miss Allie, we are giving you a 5-star review.
Good job.
Thank you so much for leaving us such a wonderful review.
And who was that other bitch?
That was cared enough to review. And maybe you could correct yourself in the next review and say we're Michigan trash.
Yeah, if you could... If you could please edit your review, correct it to say Michigan, that we would appreciate that.
Yes. Also, before we go, we have some shout-outs.
Oh, yes.
So, do you want to read them or shall I?
Are they easy names?
Yes.
Oh, then I'll do it.
Talia will do it. So please hold your applause, everyone.
Hold your applause. We want to give a special thanks to Heather, Angie, J. Rods, Natasha R., Nick, Jessica, Misty, Opal, Desiree, Jordan, Kim, Lee, Kat, and Alicia.
Thank you.
For those that don't know, they have joined our membership. It's through Patreon, and by becoming members, they help support us.
Yes, they do.
And that's truly, honestly, how we make enough money to do this podcast. The commercials you guys hear, which, again, no one wants to hear them, right? Do you want to hear commercials?
Of course not.
Just ours. They don't really bring in that much. So by becoming a member, you help support us so we can continue doing amazing true crime stories.
And you get all kinds of cool stuff when you become a member.
Absolutely.
For a mere $8 a month, you get 4 extra full episodes a month, 2 mini episodes, 2 live episodes.
And our love.
Of course, our undying love.
But they get that anyway.
You do.
You can go to tntcrimes.com. That's our website, where you can find episodes that are free, but not available on your app that you're listening to right now. And you can also get more information about becoming a member there. And more information on this episode.
Absolutely, and all of our other episodes.
Absolutely, 100%.
You can also find us on social media, Instagram and Facebook at Hardcore True Crime.
Hardcore True Crime.
All right.
That was a lot of business.
It was a lot of business, and we hope you stuck around for it all.
We appreciate you guys.
Thank you so much.
Don't kill each other.
Bye.
Bye.